"Don't argue with my wife in her house," my son roared, jabbing a finger at my face in the very kitchen where I'd laid every tile with my own cracked hands. My daughter-in-law stood there with her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her lips, watching as my own flesh and blood humiliated me in front of her. I stepped back, my heart going numb in that instant. I didn't shed another tear. I quietly changed every lock in the house, each little click like a silent oath that no one would cross this threshold without my say-so again. In less than an hour, the pounding and screaming started. My son lost control, shouting my name in desperation. My daughter-in-law sobbed, hurled her phone, and in the middle of the night there was nothing left but endless pleading. I sat in the dark, a cold cup of tea in my hand, listening to each knock on the door as if it were rapping on my own past. The house was silent, save for the tick of an old clock and the patter of rain on the eaves. I've lived in this house for 30 years, every brick underfoot, every brush stroke on the walls, every hint of apple pie in the kitchen holds a lifetime's breath. And now, this very place has become where I was shamed by the son I raised. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I, Loretta Wynn, 69, a widow in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. My late husband Calvin and I built this house with sweat, tears, and every dollar we scraped together doing jobs no one wanted. Calvin was a mason. I did laundry for families nearby. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy. Calvin always said, "Loretta, this house will be your legacy. If I'm ever gone, you'll still have a place to come home to." I believed that for half my life. I remember every detail, the first bricks Calvin set by sunset light, the nights I stayed up mending clothes, counting every dollar to pay for materials. When he died in a work accident, I swore I wouldn't let this house fall into someone else's hands. Yet now, a single sentence from our son made me feel like a stranger in the very home I built with my own sweat. That kitchen where Darren just screamed used to be where I baked his first birthday cake. As a boy, he'd sit on the counter, legs swinging, waiting for me to pull the cake from the oven. He used to say, "Mom, when I'm big, I'll build you a really big kitchen." Now, he's not only forgotten that promise, he treats this kitchen as someone else's house. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, stood with her arms crossed like a victorious queen. She came into my son's life 3 years ago, and from that day on, everything in this house started changing. She said the wall paint was too gloomy, the curtains tacky, and the old photos of me and Calvin carried bad energy. I laughed at first, thinking she wanted to help. But I realized what Rebecca wanted wasn't to help, it was to take over bit by bit, from the kitchen, to the living room, to my son's heart. I kept quiet. Quiet when she replaced every piece of furniture without asking. Quiet when she took down our family photos and put up only their wedding pictures. Quiet even when she invited friends over for parties and left me to sit alone in my room, listening to laughter echo through the house. I thought silence would bring peace. I was wrong. People say silence in the face of disrespect isn't kindness, it's handing someone the right to hurt you. That morning, it started with a few rose bushes. I'd grown those roses for 15 years, each one a memory of Calvin and me. Rebecca decided they blocked the view of her new coffee machine. When I gently said the spot she wanted would get no sun and the roses would die, she shrugged. "Then buy new ones." "Everything old should be replaced, Mom." Before I could speak, Darren snapped his newspaper shut, voice sharp. "Rebecca's right. Stop giving her a hard time." "This house is hers too." I stood still. Just one line, hers too, was enough to make me face what I didn't want to admit. I hadn't been treated like the owner for a long time. I was just a guest in the very home I'd bled for. I tried to stay calm. "Just ask me first before changing anything in the house, please." That's when Darren shouted the words that changed my life. "Don't argue with my wife in her house." I looked at my son, the boy I stayed up all night sewing his graduation gown for, the boy I sold my only sewing machine to cover his tuition, now telling me I had no rights in my own home. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply stepped back and took one last look around the kitchen. Every tile, every wooden cabinet is a mark of love, labor, and my life. When they left, I opened a drawer and pulled out a bundle of old papers wrapped in plastic. The deed, my name, Loretta Wynne, printed clearly. I wiped the dust from the corner and laid it flat on the table, a reminder that I hadn't lost my rights. I'd just forgotten I had the right to stand up. I called Earl, an old friend who worked construction with my husband. "Earl, you still doing locksmith work?" "Sure, Loretta. You lose a key?" "No," I said slowly. "I want every lock changed. Front door, back door, and the shed, as soon as possible." He chuckled over the phone. "Planning to kick someone out?" I answered, oddly calm. "No, Earl. I'm just taking back my own space." When he came, I held the flashlight, passed him screws, and steadied the doors. With each click of a new lock, I felt lighter, like each turn was sealing away shame and hurt and opening a new chapter for me. After Earl left, I poured myself a hot cup of tea and sat at the table. The light fell through the window onto the worn wood Calvin had built. I rested my hand on it and whispered, "Calvin, don't worry. I'm still here, and no one is taking this place from me." I stood and checked each lock again, touching every door as if I were touching the house's N. Outside, the streetlights lit the yard, and rain began to fall. When the clock struck 12 a.m., a car stopped at the gate. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Then the banging started, frantic and chaotic, and Darren shouted, "Mom, open the door! What are you doing?" Rebecca screamed too. "Are you crazy? This is our house!" I stayed seated, listening to them the way you listen to a storm pass. Darren pounded, then pleaded, then yelled. Rebecca cried and begged, her voice cracking. The knocks turned into punches, then slowed, then stopped. I didn't say a word. I just took my final sip of tea, tasting the bitterness laced with the sweetness of release. That night, they were on the outside, and I was inside my own home. And I knew that when they woke up somewhere unfamiliar in the morning, they would understand. Sometimes a mother's silence isn't forgiveness, it's the beginning of consequences. When the knocking finally faded, I sat in the soft yellow light, hollowed out yet strangely at peace. Memories rushed back, as if the house itself were whispering its story. I remember the day I set foot in Richmond, nearly 45 years ago. I was just past 20, clutching 2 old suitcases, a little boy on my hip, and a heart full of dreams. I was born in a poor town in southern Georgia, where women spent their lives doing odd jobs and raising kids. I didn't want my future boxed into ash-gray kitchens and pitying looks. I wanted a real home, a place that was mine, where no one could say get out just because I was poor. Calvin, my husband, was quiet, gentle, with strong hands and the eyes of a man who knew how to dream big. We met at church one fall Sunday. He told me, "Loretta, if you believe, we'll build something no one can take." And I did. I believed in him and in myself. Those early years were brutal. Calvin hauled loads on job sites. I took in laundry at a small shop in the black neighborhood. The pay was tiny, but we saved every dollar. By day, I stood 10 hours over tubs of soapy water, my hands raw and swollen. By night, I mended clothes to make a few more bucks. Some nights, we'd count pennies at the table, laughing while we dreamed about a small piece of land of our own. One June morning, Calvin came home with his eyes shining. "They're selling a vacant lot near the old creek. $3,000. If we push hard, we can buy it." I laughed. $3,000 then felt like $3 million, but I looked at him and said, "We'll make it." From then on, we worked like time was running out. Calvin took night shifts. I woke at 4 a.m. to bake pies for the flea market. The first apple pies were burnt, but folks got used to me. Every time I sold a batch, I tucked the money into a tin box under the mattress, our dream box. 3 years later, we paid in full. The little patch sat at the city's edge, nothing but weeds and rocks, but to me it was heaven. Calvin stood in the middle, took my hand and said, "Loretta, this is where we'll grow old together." We started building the house with our own hands. No crew, just love and grit. I mixed cement. Calvin set each brick. Every afternoon, as the sun tilted low, I brought him water and wiped the sweat from his brow. He'd smile and say, "This house will have your soul in every brick." We lived in a metal shed nearly 5 years to save for materials. On rainy nights, water blew in through the seams. I held the boys close, listening to thunder, still feeling warm inside, because I knew we were building our dream, bit by bit. Then the house was finished. Not big, not fancy, but solid and full of love. 2 small bedrooms, a red brick kitchen, and a west-facing porch where the sunset poured soft gold. I planted roses along the fence. Calvin built a wooden swing for the boys. Every evening we sat there, listened to the radio, ate pie, and talked about the future. Those years were the best of my life. Then the accident came. One morning, while I was hanging laundry, the site manager came with the news. Calvin fell from the scaffold. I remember the towel dropping from my hands, my knees buckling. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. The house we built suddenly felt hollow enough to choke me. All I had left were 2 sons, Darren at 15, Noah at 12. I had to be strong. There was no one else. I tucked Calvin's wedding band into a little wooden box and stood up. From that day, I was both mother and father. I took more work laundry, cooking, babysitting for neighbors. Some days my hands bled from bleach. My back screamed. But when I heard my boys laughing inside, the pain melted away. Darren was bright and studious. He wanted to be an engineer, said he'd build Mom another house, bigger this time. I remember the day he ran home waving his college acceptance letter, eyes shining. "Mom, I did it." I smiled, but my throat tightened. We didn't have the money. I looked at my old sewing machine, my companion for years, and knew what I had to do. I sold it to a neighbor for exactly $1,000. It covered Darren's first semester tuition. That night, after I handed it over, I sat alone, staring at the empty spot on the table, listening to rain on the window. But thinking of my son's dream, I told myself, no sacrifice is meaningless if it lets a child take flight. I taught my boys what I've believed all my life: honesty, gratitude, and respect. I told them, when you're wealthy, remember to nod to the street sweeper. When you succeed, don't forget the hands that carried you through hunger. Darren grew up just like he dreamed he became an engineer. On the day he wore his cap and gown, I sat in the back row, crying and clapping at the same time, filled with a pride I can't describe. I thought, Calvin, do you see this? Our son did it. And Noah, the younger one, trained in computer technology. He doesn't talk much, but always looks out for his mother. Every weekend he brings flowers, fixes a light bulb, changes a pipe. Every time I look at my 2 boys, I think all my hardships were worth it. This house, small as it is, raised all 3 of us. It's not just a shelter. It's a witness to love, persistence, and dignity. Every crack in the wall is the mark of time. Every brick is a reminder. I was once poor, once grieving, but I never broke. I think if Calvin were alive, he'd be so proud. Because this house doesn't stand firm just because of cement and brick, but because of something stronger, the unyielding will of a woman who refuses to be stepped on. I looked around the kitchen, the place where that shout, "Her house," still echoed. I gently laid my hand on the tabletop, the wood worn smooth by years. I whispered, as if to the one who's gone, "Calvin, do you see? They forgot who built this place. But I'll make them remember. Not with anger, but with clarity and self-respect. I sighed softly and looked out the window. The roses by the porch were still blooming, fragile but stubborn. I understood they're like me. You can move them, trample them, but give them a little light and they'll rise, more beautiful than ever. This house was once built by my calloused hands, and now it will be the place where I rebuild myself. If anyone asked me when the roof started turning cold, I'd say, the day Rebecca walked in. My daughter-in-law, Rebecca Moore, 35, divorced, an accountant at a construction company in Richmond. The first day Darren brought her home, I saw something you can't hide in someone's eyes, a cold calculation wrapped in perfect sweetness. She walked into my home with just enough smiles, a soft voice, and compliments that sounded real but were hollow. "Oh, it's so cozy, Mrs. Loretta. Your apple pie smells amazing. Just like Christmas when I was little." But when her eyes scanned the room from the floral curtains I sewed, the old photo frames, to the rug Calvin once picked, I saw a quiet disdain. That look said more than words. Old. Tacky. Not worthy of me. Darren, of course, didn't notice. He looked at her the way a man in love does, like the whole world had shrunk to the woman standing there. I kept calm. I smiled, brought out pie, poured them tea. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, maybe she was just out of place. But then Rebecca chuckled and said to Darren, "Babe, this place is cute, but so small. If we repaint and change the curtains, it'll look much brighter." I heard it clearly, but still smiled. "Feel free when you two have your own place. You can paint to your heart's content. Here, everything's already familiar to me." Rebecca shrugged, sipped her tea, then gave Darren a meaningful look. I knew, from that second, the stranger had started marking territory. 3 months later, Darren announced the wedding. I was happy, truly happy. Every mother wants her child to be happy, and I'm no different. I picked out white fabric and sewed Darren a shirt myself, and I tucked $3,000, my entire rainy day savings, into an envelope as their wedding gift. Darren hugged me and thanked me, but Rebecca only smiled and said lightly, "Thanks, Mom. We'll use it to pay for the reception. We didn't really need you to cover anything, but hey, if it makes you feel included." It sounded polite, but it sank my heart. Not because of the money, but because of the way she said, "If it makes you feel included." I nodded and stayed quiet. I told myself, "It's fine. Your son's getting married, you have to be generous." After the wedding, they said they'd stay a few months to save for a house. I agreed right away. I thought the house was big enough, and having young people around might be nice. I even prepared a room for them, cleared a closet, washed the linens till they smelled fresh, and hung an extra wedding photo of theirs on the wall. I wanted Rebecca to feel welcome. I know being a daughter-in-law in someone else's home is never easy. I didn't realize those few months would open the door for a quiet storm that would tear through my home. On the first day they moved in, Rebecca arrived with a whole truckload of furniture. She came in directing Darren to shift the sofa, move the dining table, then said, "This corner needs a mirror. The light will bounce and make the room feel bigger." I watched in silence as Calvin's old armchair was pushed out onto the porch. Our wedding photo was moved to the bottom shelf, replaced by their large, glossy wedding portrait. I said nothing. I didn't want to start life together with an argument. But inside I heard Calvin whisper, "Loretta, they're taking what's yours piece by piece." A week later, I came home from work to find the floral curtains I sewed swapped out for a cold olive green. She spoke gently. "I think this color fits better, more modern, more elegant. Don't you like it, Mom?" I answered, "If someone had asked me first, I might like it more." Rebecca gave a thin smile. "I'm just trying to make you happy." "Didn't think you'd be so sensitive." Darren heard and jumped in right away. "She's only helping, Mom. Don't be so strict." That felt like a tiny knife sliding a little deeper. From then on, I felt myself slowly being pushed out of the owner's seat. One weekend afternoon, I came home from the market and found the house full of strangers. Laughter everywhere, the smell of perfume and liquor flooding the living room. Rebecca was hosting a party with her friends. They filled every chair, ate cake from my pantry, drank coffee out of my commemorative cups, the ones I only use on Thanksgiving. I paused in the doorway. Rebecca smiled and called out, "Oh, Mom, you're back!" "I invited a few friends over, hope you don't mind." I forced a smile. "No, just a bit surprised." One of her friends muttered, loud enough for me to hear, "This place has a nice vintage vibe, but it definitely needs work," Rebecca answered without lowering her voice. "Yeah, I think so too. Once we've saved enough, we'll remodel." I heard every bit of that we. This house, the one I built with Calvin, where I raised my sons, was now being talked about like it belonged to them. After that, I learned Rebecca wasn't here to stay for a while. She was here to take over. It started small. She swapped dishes, moved the altar, added flashy throw pillows. Then even my daily routines were disrupted. In the mornings, I'd get up early to make coffee, only to find Rebecca had used up all the hot water. She'd shower for ages, singing like she was on stage. When I mentioned it, Darren just chuckled. "Mom, Rebecca's job is stressful, let her relax." At night, I'd turn on my usual news program. Rebecca grabbed the remote and switched to a drama. "Mom, this show won an Emmy. You should watch it instead of those depressing news segments." I stayed quiet. I didn't want to turn my home into a battlefield. But silence is its own kind of pain. Once, Noah, the younger one, stopped by, and the moment he walked in, asked softly, "Mom, why does the living room look so different?" I just said, "Rebecca likes it that way." Noah looked around and murmured, "But this is your house." I smiled sadly. "Sometimes people forget that, son." One evening, while I set the table, Rebecca said to Darren, "I'm inviting coworkers over tomorrow night. Mom won't mind, right?" Then she turned to me, her voice sweet but fake. "Mom, I want everyone to see our beautiful house." I set the spoon down and looked straight at her. "Our house?" Rebecca gave a little laugh. "I mean, our home. We all live here." Darren squeezed her hand and said, "Mom, don't get hung up on words. Rebecca just has a different way of saying things. She truly loves you." I looked at the two of them and felt like I was standing between two worlds, one I built with blood and one that was pretending its way in, inch by inch. I didn't argue or scold. I just cleared the dishes, wiped the table, and told myself, people can take your seat, but they can't take your memories. What I didn't know was that Rebecca didn't just want a seat. She wanted the right to rule. And Darren, the son I thought would protect me, was helping her do it without even realizing. Those little phrases, "Don't be strict, Mom," "She's only trying to help, you need to adapt," each one was a small cut, slicing into the heart of a mother who gave up everything. I began to feel like a lost guest in the very home I built. And deep down, I knew. The storm hadn't stopped, it was just starting. Some mornings I'd wake up, walk into the kitchen, and need a few seconds to realize I was standing in my own house. Everything familiar had been distorted. The wooden dining table Calvin made was replaced with cold stone, the soft floral curtains swapped for trendy ash gray. The family photos I'd hung for more than 20 years were gone, replaced by shiny wedding portraits of Rebecca and Darren, smiling those empty smiles. I stood there, like someone lost in the place that used to be my breath. Rebecca ran everything without even trying to hide it. She decided the meals, the schedule, the very rhythm of the house. I used to wake at 5:30 a.m. to make coffee and water the plants, but now, the moment my footsteps sounded, Rebecca would open her door with a frown. "Could you wait until 7? "I need a little more sleep." I nodded and went back to my room, throat tight. In this house, I no longer had the right to rise early. At lunch, she swapped in unfamiliar dishes, salads, salmon, dark bread. I still cooked the traditional meals, pot roast or beans, but Rebecca always made a face. "Those are so greasy, Mom. Nobody eats like that anymore." Darren sat silent, nodding like it made perfect sense. I was slowly pushed out of the kitchen, the little world that was once mine. Rebecca said, "Mom, let me cook. I don't want you getting tired." But really, she didn't want me in her space. I stood in the doorway and watched her open cabinets, move bowls, rearrange the spice jars I'd labeled by hand. Everything got relabeled, reorganized, Rebecca's way. I no longer knew where the salt was. I couldn't even recognize the scents I used to know by heart. My kitchen, the one where I cooked for my husband and sons for decades, felt like a strange room in my own house. The living room wasn't mine anymore either. Rebecca started inviting friends every weekend, loud music, laughter filling the house. I usually sat in the corner chair to read, but she would say lightly, "Mom, could you go walk in the garden for a bit? I need space to host." One March afternoon, when the cold wind still slipped through the window frames, I heard her say it again, sugar on her voice, ice in her tone. I didn't answer. I closed my book gently, set it on the table, and put on my coat to head outside. I sat on the steps and looked through the fogged-up window. Inside, they laughed and raised glasses, as if I were a boarder and not the owner. The room's light bounced off the mirror, and I caught my reflection, a silver-haired woman, small, hands trembling, pushed to the margins of her own life. On my 69th birthday, I thought at least Darren would remember. Every year he got me a cake, even just a small one from the corner shop. But that year I waited all morning, no one said a word. That evening Rebecca said, "Are you free tonight, Mom? We'll take you to dinner." I smiled a little. Late as it was, my heart warmed. But when the car stopped, I went cold. It was a cheap diner on the corner, the kind of place people eat quickly, not somewhere you celebrate a birthday. They ordered 2 meatloaf plates and 1 salad. The bill was a little over $20. Rebecca chatted through the meal. Darren kept glancing at his phone. No cake, no candles, no birthday wishes. On the way home, she whispered to her husband, thinking I couldn't hear. "At least the obligation's done." That sentence slid into me like a cold knife. I stayed quiet all night. No tears, just my heart pulling tight, shrinking like a candle's flame about to go out. Darren started feeling like a stranger. He stopped asking if I was well, if I needed anything from the market. When I reached to help him mend a shirt, he said, "No need, Mom, Rebecca can sew." When I cooked his favorite dish, he ate only a few bites, then said, "I'm used to eating light now." "Don't go to the trouble, Mom." I looked at him, searching for myself in his eyes, and found only a cold emptiness. The boy who once hugged me and cried when his father died now spoke to me like I was a stranger. I used to think a mother's love could never fade. Turns out, if someone is shrewd enough, they can make a child believe his own mother is a burden. Rebecca didn't need to shout or argue. She just wore me down, bit by bit, until I backed out of everything on my own. I started eating alone. Their dinner was after 7 p.m., and I ate early so I wouldn't be in the way. Rebecca said, "Don't wait, Mom. I'll cook later for Darren." Then she made 2 separate portions and set the table with only 2 plates. I used to sit at the head of the table, where Calvin once sat across from me. Now that chair was always cleared away and replaced with a vase of flowers. I moved to the corner chair, ate quietly, and listened to them talk like a soundtrack that wasn't meant for me. Some days, when they had guests and I stepped out, Rebecca smiled. "Mom, why don't you get some fresh air in the garden? It's loud in here." I understood what she meant. I withdrew, like a housemaid who knows her place. Outside it was cold. I sat under the porch, listening to the wind whistle through the fence, watching the light spill from the house I used to call home. I missed Calvin so much it hurt. If he were alive, he would never let me go through this. But I also know if he were here, he'd say, "Loretta, Don't let anyone take your dignity from you, not even your son. In all that loss, only the little garden was still mine. I tended the 15-year-old rosebush's flowers I planted for Calvin. Every morning before sunrise, I walked out with my old watering can, touching each bloom like I was touching a piece of memory. Every plant had its own story. The first one I planted on our 10th anniversary, a deep blood red. The second bloomed for the first time the year Calvin died. I called it Hope. Those pots were my friends, a reminder that life still lived in me, even as everything in this house withered. Rebecca didn't like the garden. She said the roses were an eyesore and a mess to clean. I just smiled. They're my friends. When there's no one left to talk to, I still have them. She shrugged and turned away, not bothering to hide her disgust, but I didn't need her to understand. I only needed that little garden where every rose knew I still existed. Sometimes Noah stopped by. He sensed the change, even though I said nothing. "Mom, you look thinner," he said, sadness flickering in his eyes. I only smiled. "I'm fine. Just a little tired from the weather." He looked around, noticed Calvin's photo was gone from the wall, and frowned slightly. "Why don't I see Dad's picture anymore?" I answered softly, "Rebecca likes things simple." I put it in my room. Noah was quiet for a long moment, then said quietly, "I don't like the way they treat you." I laid a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, everything will have to change, sooner or later." Every night, when they went upstairs, I sat alone by the window, watching moonlight fall across the garden. I heard the wind in the roses, as if Calvin were speaking to me. "You're still as strong as ever, Loretta." I nodded gently. Yes, I was still strong. But I also knew that if I kept staying silent, one day I'd disappear not from this house but from my own life, and I swore that would never happen. That day began like any other, quiet, damp, and carrying a hollow I couldn't name. I didn't know that within a few hours everything would change for good. I stepped into the garden at first light, old watering can in hand, ready to tend the rose bushes I'd cared for 15 years. The whole yard was still soaked with dew. The air was cool, the scent of blossoms faint and clean. The roses were in perfect bloom, fresh and bright red, as if trying to survive in a home that was slowly no longer mine. But when I reached the fence, my heart seized. All the rose pots were gone. Where they had stood, the place where Calvin once sat fixing a pipe, where I watched the sunrise, was empty. A few petals were scattered on the ground, bruised from being dragged. I rushed around the yard. Then I saw them crammed into a dark corner behind the garage where sunlight never reached. Right beside them sat a brand new coffee machine, its cord dangling like an intruder staking a claim. Rebecca stood there in a cream robe, a coffee cup in hand, sipping casually like she'd just done the right thing. I asked quietly, as calmly as I could, "Rebecca, who moved these rose pots?" She didn't look at me. "I did. This corner's more convenient. If we put the coffee machine in the sun, it'll break." I looked around the place where the roses used to catch morning light, where Calvin and I sat after long days. I kept my voice gentle. "They need Sunday." "Here, they'll die." Rebecca turned, her eyes cold as steel. "They're just pots of flowers, Mom. You're overthinking, and this spot works better." "This is my house, too." I froze. "My house, too." The words landed clean and sharp, like a blade cutting off what little memory I had left. I looked around the brick wall Calvin built, the porch he fixed, the paint I brushed on myself, all of it now treated like shared property by someone who'd been here less than 3 years. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Rebecca, I didn't finish." Darren stepped out from the house. He'd heard bits of it and frowned. "What now? Mom, you're upset again?" I turned to explain, "I'm just saying the roses shouldn't be in the dark." "They'll die, Darren." But before I could say more, Rebecca raised her voice. "I only wanted to tidy things up, but your mom won't get it. She always thinks I'm ruining everything." I looked at my son, the one I loved, cared for, and protected all my life. Instead of listening, he slammed his hand on the patio table, his voice dropping like a stone. "Don't argue with my wife in her house." I went numb. Her house. I stared at Darren for a long time and saw clearly. The boy who used to kiss my forehead every night before bed was now a stranger, defending his wife by tearing his mother's heart open in front of someone else. I said nothing. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I quietly walked back into the house, through a living room, now full of things that held none of my memories. My heart wasn't racing with anger, it was filled with something else. Clarity. When they left, I stood a long time before the mirror in my bedroom. The face staring back showed my years, but the eyes were no longer weak. I realized I had given and kept giving until I lost myself. I opened the closet and took out an old leather bag. Inside were the house papers I'd guarded for years like treasure. On the yellowing page, my name was still there, clear and unblurred. By time, Loretta YNN, legal owner. I laid my hand over that line, as if touching my own life. I whispered, "This isn't her house. It's mine. It's Calvin's. It's made of years of sweat and tears." I went to the landline and dialed a number I'd known for decades, Earl Henderson, my husband's old friend, now a locksmith. "Earl, are you still working?" I asked. His voice was warm as ever. "I am." "What's wrong, lock jammed?" I smiled slightly. "No, Earl. I want them all changed. Front door, back door, the shed, and the gate. As soon as possible." He was quiet for a few seconds, then said softly, "Mrs. Loretta, what happened?" I only said, "Nothing. I just want my house back." 2 hours later, Earl arrived. He looked around at the house, unfamiliar and full of new things, and let out a small sigh. "You kept the rose garden?" I smiled sadly. "They were just moved, but tomorrow they'll be back." While he worked, the clink of metal echoed in steady beats, click, clack, turn like a new heartbeat for the house. I sat at the window watching him swap out each lock as the late light washed the room in gold. Every changed lock felt like a turn of fate, closing the days of being dismissed and opening a new chapter of self-respect. When Earl finished the last lock, he asked, "Feel better now?" I answered, light but steady, "Yes. Thank you, Earl. Tonight, I'll finally sleep well." He nodded and shook my hand, his eyes saying more than words. Night fell. The house was quiet. Only the tick of the clock and the wind through the trees. I sat by the window, looking out at the yard where the rose pots still sat in the dark corner. Tomorrow, I'd bring them back to their spot so they could catch the sun and bloom like before. I held my teacup. The steam warmed my hands. In that stillness, I heard the crisp clicks of the new locks, each one like a declaration. No one would cross this threshold without my permission again. No one would call this her house. I sat there, closed my eyes, and breathed in the chamomile. For the first time in years, I felt truly calm. Not because I'd won, but because I stood up for what was mine. On the wall, Calvin's photo was still there. I looked at him and smiled softly. "I did it, love. I'm not afraid anymore." Moonlight spilled onto the porch, glinting silver on the new locks. The house was still, but I could feel it breathing again, as if it too was relieved to be back in the hands of its rightful owner. I whispered, just for me to hear, "From now on, Loretta Wynne will not be thrown out of her own home." And that night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. The sleep of a woman who just reclaimed her dignity and the keys to her life. That night, Richmond's sky felt heavy, thick with rain and electricity. I sat by the window, the curtains stirring, my cup of tea gone cold. The clock in the living room struck 1 a.m., right as I heard a car stop at the gate. 2 headlights swept across the brick wall, then went dark. A car door slammed, footsteps rushed, and Darren's voice rose in the yard, hoarse, sleepy, edged with anger. "Rebecca, Mom probably just forgot the outside lock. Hold on." I didn't move. I knew perfectly well this time I hadn't forgotten anything. A key slid into the lock, twisted, then stopped. A short silence, then Darren knocked. "Mom, open up." The lock stuck. No answer. Seconds later, Rebecca knocked harder, her voice rising. "Mrs. Loretta, can you hear us? Open the door." I stayed in the dark, peeking through the curtain. Under the streetlight, their faces were starting to show confusion. Darren tried the key again. The metal clacked like desperation knocking on the house itself. "Maybe she changed the locks," Rebecca said, voice trembling but still trying to sound proud. Darren frowned. "No way. Who would do that? Maybe to get back at us." She said it quietly, but I heard every word. I took a sip of cold tea. The chamomile was bitter on my tongue. They still didn't understand this wasn't retaliation, it was the end of my patience. 10 minutes later, the knocking turned into pounding. "Mom, open the door now!" Darren's voice screamed, laced with panic. "Are you crazy, Mom? We live here!" I stayed silent. I wanted them to feel the chill of distance, the loneliness of people who once looked down on others. Rebecca started yelling, "You think this is right? You're just making everyone see how pathetic you are." Then she burst into tears. Sobs, footsteps scraping the tile, the sprinkle of rain mixed in. I still didn't move. In the dark, I heard my heart beating slow and steady. Each beat was the rhythm of a quiet reckoning, not with words, not with tears, but with intentional silence. "We'll sleep in the car," Rebecca shouted after the pounding went nowhere. Darren said nothing. I knew he was thinking. He understood he had no rights here anymore. A moment later, I heard the engine start. Headlights flashed, cutting across the fence where the roses had been left in the dark corner. Then the car rolled away and disappeared into the night. The house fell still again. No more pounding. No more bitter words. Just me and the peace I'd bought with courage. I stood up and walked the house, touching each new lock, each closed door. No other hands could open them now, except mine. For the first time in years, I felt safe in my own home. I stepped onto the porch and took a long breath. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of earth and a faint drift of roses. I smiled softly. On the wooden swing Calvin built, I sat and looked at the fogged-up sky, took another sip of tea. Tonight, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of the kind of endurance that makes people think you're weak. The next morning, I woke later than usual. The first light spilled through the window, so gentle it made everything look like a dream. I ate breakfast alone, toast and eggs, and brewed a cup of coffee. The coffee machine Rebecca had placed in the sun, I'd put away in the shed, along with the things she called trendy. As I was washing dishes, the phone rang. Darren's name lit up the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. His voice was tight, exhausted. "Mom, I'm sorry about last night. I just want to come in and grab our things. Rebecca needs clothes, papers. Can you open the door for a minute?" I dried my hands and answered evenly, "No, Darren. When there's an apology, I'll open the door." He went quiet for a few seconds. Then his voice turned cold. "Don't make me call the police." I chuckled lightly, not angry, just pitying. "The police? Go ahead if you want. But they'll ask whose name is on the deed." "And you already know the answer." A long silence. I heard heavy breathing on the other end. Then a click. He hung up. I set the phone down, calm. I knew the real battle had just begun. All morning, I sat on the porch. Sunlight glinted on the new locks, bright like silver. I listened to birds chatter, the wind tapping the fence, and realized those sounds were more familiar than any words. The house no longer echoed with arguments, no longer smelled like costly perfume drowning out old tea, no longer heard Rebecca's heels clacking down the hall like she owned the place. Now, there was only the wind and my own whisper. I closed my eyes and replayed Darren's line from last night. Her house. How ironic. I'd let them believe that for far too long. At noon, a car stopped at the gate. I didn't need to look to know they were back. Darren pressed the bell, his voice tense. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I really need to get our stuff." I opened the window, not the gate, and said clearly, "Darren, your things will be packed in bags on the porch tomorrow. You can pick them up without coming." Rebecca cut in, her voice sharp. "You have no right to keep our things." I looked at her through the window, steady. "You're mistaken. I'm not keeping anything. I'm protecting what's mine." Darren tugged her arm and murmured, "Let's go, Rebecca." "Mom's not going to change," she snapped. "Just wait and see." They left, tires screeching against the road like anger that hadn't burned out. That afternoon, I carried the watering can to the garden and put the roses back. I set each pot in its old spot, where the sun fell kindly. The soil at the roots was hard and dry, but as I poured water, it softened, drinking it in, as if the flowers were exhaling. I bent and stroked a petal. "We're home," I whispered. "From now on, no one moves you again." A light breeze passed, and the roses trembled. I lifted my eyes to a sky clearer after the night's rain. At sunset, I sat again on Calvin's swing. The sun slipped behind the trees, leaving a wash of pink-orange across the yard. I closed my eyes and heard the new lock click as the door shut behind me. For the first time in years, I truly felt at home, not because of the walls or the roof, but because I'd reclaimed the right to be here without asking anyone's permission. I breathed in deep and let it out slow. Inside me, there was no anger left, only clarity. This fight didn't need shouting. It only needed silence strong enough to be heard. And that night, I brewed another cup of tea, sat by the window, watched the moonlight fall on the eaves, and smiled. Because for the first time in months, I could say to myself, "Loretta Wynn, you are home." 3 days after Darren and Rebecca left, I still hadn't heard from them. The house was strangely quiet, no footsteps, no pointless fights. I made tea, turned on the radio, and felt as light as if I'd just dusted after a storm. I thought they'd call soon. But they stayed silent. And I wasn't in a hurry. Until a Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a woman in a leather jacket and sunglasses, confident to the point of defiant. She looked around like she was appraising the place. When I opened the door, she gave a stiff smile. "Are you Loretta Wynn?" "I'm Alyssa Moore, Rebecca's sister." I nodded and motioned her in, already guessing why she'd come. Alyssa spoke before I could pour tea. "Rebecca asked me to talk. She says you're making things difficult." I arched a brow. "Difficult?" "Yes. She says you changed the locks, won't let them get their things, and said things that hurt Darren. I think at your age you should be a little more accommodating." Her voice was smooth, but every word dripped condescension. I answered calmly, "I just want peace in my own home. If that makes them uncomfortable, maybe they should review how they've been treating me." Alyssa sneered. "Or maybe you're jealous? My sister is young, educated, and knows how to live modern. I hear you keep the house old-fashioned floral curtains, wedding photos from the last century, things no one displays anymore. Maybe Rebecca was only trying to help." I went quiet for a few seconds. A year ago, those words might have choked me. Now they just seemed ridiculous. I poured tea, slid a cup toward her, and said slowly, "I'm not jealous of anyone, Miss Alyssa. But I'd rather live alone and be respected than share a home with people who only know how to look down on others." Alyssa paused, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "No wonder my sister says you're hard to live with. You really are one of those older generation types who always think they're right. Maybe that's why your husband put up with it his whole life and still didn't get far." I lifted my head. My eyes went cold. "You don't know anything about my husband, so don't speak his name, and if you came here to insult me, the door's open. You can leave." The air tightened. Alyssa set her untouched cup down, anger flashing in her eyes. "You know," she said, voice sharp as a blade, "my sister's been through this before. Her ex-husband's family kicked her out too, because they couldn't stand her being straightforward. And I think you're doing the same thing, pushing another woman out of a home." I tilted my head. "You're saying Rebecca was kicked out by her ex's family?" Alyssa was silent for a beat, realizing she'd slipped. "It doesn't matter. That's in the past." I gave a thin smile. "It matters. Because now I see the problem isn't me. Your sister never learned to respect anyone." Alyssa shot to her feet and grabbed her purse. "Talking to you is pointless." "No wonder Rebecca says you're controlling and stubborn," I answered lightly. "Maybe, but at least I know how to hold a boundary. Something your sister never learned." She turned and marched out, heels striking the pavement like she was stamping out her anger. I watched her go. Not angry, only seeing the truth more clearly. When the gate clicked shut, I sat down, took a sip of cold tea, and whispered, "Thank you, Alyssa. You just told me what I most needed to know." 2 weeks later, the phone rang at midday. Unknown number. I wasn't going to answer, but a feeling made me pick up. Darren's voice came through, hoarse and tired. "Mom, it's me." I stayed silent. "Mom, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need help. I'm out of money. My phone's been cut off. Rebecca's crying, and we're at a cheap motel near the bus station. I just need a little money for the apartment deposit, and I'll pay you back." I closed my eyes, listening to the ceiling fan spin slowly. What I felt wasn't anger, it was heaviness. My son, who once had a steady job and lived in the home his parents built, was now begging because he'd thrown it all away. I asked quietly, "And your job?" They suspended me. Rebecca said she'd help me find something else, but nothing yet. "And your savings?" "Gone, Rebecca. Bought some essentials." I sat up straight. "Essentials like a $300 coffee machine?" I asked, even and cool. Darren went silent, only a long, shaky sigh. "Mom," his voice broke, "I know I was wrong. I'm just asking you to help once." I gripped the receiver, feeling both love and pain, but if I softened now, everything would go back to the way it was. I spoke slowly, each word clear. "Darren, if you had shown respect, you wouldn't have been thrown out of the place you once belonged to." The line went completely quiet. I heard something like a swallowed sob. Then his voice, small and thin, "Mom, I just want to come home," I answered. "This is still your home if you're humble enough to knock, not pound." I hung up. My hands shook a little, but inside I was strangely calm. Maybe because, for the first time in years, I wasn't being controlled by the fear of losing my son. I knew that sometimes, the only way for a child to learn the biggest lesson is for a mother to let him endure. That night, heavy rain fell. I sat by the window and watched water trace long lines down the glass. I remembered the years when Darren was little. Whenever thunder crashed, he would run to me and hide behind my back. Now he's probably sitting somewhere in a shabby room, listening to the rain like I am, but with a different feeling, the feeling of someone facing the consequences of his own choices. I don't feel happy about it. I only feel compassion, the kind a mother has when she's clear-headed enough not to rescue her child from a necessary lesson. The next morning I got a text. "Mom, I'm sorry. I won't bother you anymore. When I get a job, I'll come apologize to you in person." I read it and didn't reply. I set the phone down and stepped into the garden. The roses were coming back, tiny buds pushed up after days left in. The dark. I bent down and brushed a petal still wet with dew. Sometimes, to bring something back to life, you have to let it die first, I told myself. That afternoon, my neighbor Mrs. Jenkins stopped by with some baked goods. She heard the story and just shook her head. Sometimes people only understand the value of a home when they're forced to stand outside the door. I smiled and answered, "Exactly." And once they understand, the door can still open, only they need to know how to knock. Mrs. Jenkins held my hand and said softly, "You're strong, Loretta." If it were me, I might have caved. I looked at the roses soaking up the sun and said, "Steady and light." I used to cave too. But I realized kindness doesn't mean letting people trample your dignity. That night, I sat alone on the swing. The breeze carried the scent of newly opened roses. Moonlight shattered into pieces across the porch. I closed my eyes and pictured Calvin sitting beside me, quiet as always, his hand over mine. "Do you see?" I whispered. Our son is finally learning what we always taught: respect. And in that moment, my heart felt lighter, not anger, not hurt. Only a deep stillness, as if the storm had passed, and what fell were the things that should have fallen long ago. About 2 weeks after I refused to lend Darren money, I figured I wouldn't hear from him again. But that night, close to midnight, the phone rang. A strange number showed on the screen, not my son's old one. A feeling made me pick up, even as my chest tightened. "Mom!" Darren's voice came through, rough, dragging each word. I heard music and loud chatter in the background, glasses clinking. He was in a bar. "Have you been drinking?" I asked. "Just a few," he said, but his voice trembled and broke. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore." I sat at the table, gripping the phone. "Tell me, Darren, what happened?" He was quiet for a few seconds, then it burst out of him. Rebecca said, "If I really love her, I have to cut you off." I closed my eyes, not because I was surprised, but because I'd sensed this pain for a long time. The house, the silence, the petty fights, it all led to this moment. Still, hearing my own son say it felt like someone squeezing my heart, I said nothing for a while. On the line, there was only Darren's heavy breathing and pounding rock music. "Do you love her that much?" I asked gently, voice flat as a calm lake. I don't know anymore. Everything's a mess." "She says you hate her, that you never accepted her." I looked at an old frame on the shelf, a photo of Darren at 6, grinning next to his father in the backyard. I spoke slowly, one word at a time. "Darren, you grew up in this house. Have you ever seen me insult anyone under this roof?" Silence. So long I thought the line had dropped. Then I heard him sniff, choked up. "Never, Mom." "Then think about this. Someone who's never insulted anyone, why would she suddenly treat your wife badly? Or did someone make you see your mother differently?" I heard him gasp, then cry. He really cried the cry of a 32-year-old man who suddenly sounded like the 15-year-old boy he was when his father died. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong. I don't know how I let it get this far." I gripped the phone tighter. Tears rose, but I swallowed them. "No, Darren," I said, calm as ever. "What's saddest isn't that you were wrong, it's that you haven't grown up. A real man doesn't need orders about whom to love or hate. You let your wife dictate how you treat your own mother, so are you a husband or a child being led around?" He was quiet with only muffled sobs. "Mom, I hurt you, I know, but Rebecca says she's exhausted, that you're always against her. She's exhausted because she can't control people the way she wants, Darren, and I'm exhausted from watching you abandon respect." My voice stayed even, though my hands shook not from anger, but from a heart fighting to stay firm. I took a deep breath and went on. "Listen to me. Tomorrow, get up early. Go to work and talk to your boss. Even if you have to start from scratch, you do it. You need to stand up, not drink and complain. And if you want to talk to me, come alone." "No, Rebecca, no apologies on her behalf. No," she said, "just you and me." Darren was silent for a long time. I heard a heavy sigh reel this time, like the alcohol was wearing off. "Do you think Rebecca doesn't love me anymore?" "I don't know," I said. "But I know this. Anyone who makes you cut off your family doesn't know how to love. I heard him choke up, then speak through the rain outside the bar. "Mom, I'm sorry. I just want you to know, I'm not happy. Even with Rebecca, I feel empty. I miss home." I closed my eyes. "Home is still here, Darren. But you'll have to walk through the door with respect, not shallow apologies." He didn't answer, just kept repeating, I'm sorry, until the cell signal blended with the rain and went dead. After I hung up, I sat frozen for a long time. The room was dark except for the streetlight painting yellow streaks across the old wall. I reached for the leather journal Calvin gave me before he died, the one where I keep what I want to save for myself. I opened to a new page, pen in hand but not writing yet. I looked at an old line. "The day Calvin died, my hands shook." I smiled sadly, then wrote a new line. "Tonight, my hands don't shake anymore." I set the pen down and closed the journal. Outside, the wind tapped the window frame. Inside me, there was no fear of being disliked, no gnawing over what was lost. I realized a mother's love isn't always an embrace. Sometimes it's letting go so a child can fall and stand up on his own. The next morning, the sky was clear. Early sunlight poured through the window, washing the old wooden table where coffee rings still stained the surface. I stepped into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and took out another cup. But this time, I wasn't preparing for anyone else, just me. I made tea, added a slice of lemon, and let the scent drift through the kitchen. I sat down, watched the steam rise, and realized it was the first time in years I'd had tea without waiting for someone to come home. I thought of Calvin. If he were alive, he'd smile and say I'd finally learned how to love myself. I smiled back at the framed photo on the shelf and said softly, "See, Calvin, I did it. My hands don't shake anymore." Then I took the first sip and let the warmth spread through me. Outside, the roses had burst open after the night's rain, each petal beaded with dew, trembling in the light, but still proud, still strong. I saw myself in them. I don't know when Darren will call again, or whether he'll come back. But I know this. If he does, he'll cross the threshold with the respect I've waited my whole life to receive. As for me, this morning I brewed one more cup just for myself, and it tasted sweeter than ever. 3 days passed since Darren called drunk. I wasn't waiting for another call anymore. Inside me, everything felt closed, not by hatred, but by a strange quiet. That morning, while I was making tea, the phone rang again. A strange number, but I knew who it was the moment I saw it. I answered and held the phone to my ear. "Mrs. Wynne, it's me, Rebecca." Her voice was hoarse and tired, none of the sharpness or swagger of the woman who once gave orders in my kitchen. I said nothing and waited. "Could you listen for a few minutes? I just want to apologize so we can end all this." I sat down and set the hot cup in front of me. She'd clearly been crying, but I didn't let feelings steer me. "You want to apologize?" I asked slowly. "Then, start by listing exactly what you did wrong. Specifically, no vague talk." I heard shaky breathing on the line. Then Rebecca spoke, halting, each sentence heavy as it pushed through her throat. "I moved your things without asking. I changed the curtains, put away your husband's photo. I talked back and told you to leave your own house." I stayed quiet until she finished. Her voice was raw and tired, but I didn't hear true remorse, just the erosion of desperation. "You listed it right," I said, "but I still haven't heard one thing. Why did you do all of it?" A long silence. Then a sigh, and her voice snagged. "Because I couldn't stand Darren always talking about you. Every time we fought, he used you as an example. He said you were strong, kind, steady. I hated hearing it. I was jealous because he loves you more than me." That made me pause, not out of pity, out of surprise. I didn't expect her to be that honest, but her jealousy wasn't love. It was selfishness eating everything away. "Rebecca," I said more softly. Do you really love Darren? A stifled sob, then held back crying on the line. I think I do, but now I'm not sure. Maybe I only love the feeling of being needed. And when he turned toward you, I felt like I disappeared. I leaned back and looked out at the yard. The roses I'd trimmed yesterday still glistened, fresh as if they'd never wilted. I understood Rebecca's fear of being replaced, of not being enough, so she chose to ruin things to hold on to a warped kind of love. Rebecca, I said slowly, you didn't lose to me because of my age or because Darren loves his mother. You lost because you haven't learned to love anyone without pushing someone else down. She sobbed but didn't argue. I could hear her sniffing, breath shaking. After a few seconds I went on, I'll meet you. But just you, not Darren. Meet me? She said, startled, voice wavering. Yes. If you're sincere about apologizing, come here. A phone call isn't enough. You'll look me in the eye and say everything, not for me to forgive you, but for you to understand what you need to change if you want your life to start over. Rebecca was quiet for a long time. I heard her take a deep breath, then whisper, When do you want me to come? This afternoon, 5 p.m., when the sun starts to fade, and come alone. Okay. Her voice shrank. Thank you. I didn't answer. I hung up. That afternoon, I set the living room table, brewed a pot of Earl Grey, and placed a chair across from mine. The house was quiet except for the clock ticking on the wall. I opened the window to let the breeze in, clearing the damp left by last night's rain. 15 minutes before the hour, I looked around the house, every brick, every frame, every small thing, each tied to my life with Calvin. Each one was the result of years of sweat and tears, of real love and stubborn resolve. I realized I'd never truly lost my place as the owner. I'd just let fear of losing my son take up that space in my heart. I took a long breath. This meeting would decide everything, not only between me and Rebecca, but also Darren's future. When the clock struck 5 p.m., there was a soft knock. I opened the door and saw Rebecca standing there. She wore a simple dark dress, her face pale, no makeup. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She gripped a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums. "Hello," she said quietly. I avoided her eyes and simply said, "Come in." Rebecca sat down, both hands on her knees, trembling slightly. I poured tea and slid the cup toward her. "You said you wanted to apologize," I began. "So today, say it clearly. No beating around the bush." Rebecca swallowed hard, staring at the cup in front of her. "I was wrong. About everything. I changed things in this house without asking. I treated you badly. And I treated myself. Badly. I made Darren turn against his own mother. I know that was wrong, but back then I just wanted to prove I mattered more than you." She paused, took a deep breath, then continued in a small but steady voice. "You may not believe it, but I truly regret it. I don't even recognize who I am anymore. Darren barely talks to me now. He just goes quiet, avoids my eyes. I think I've ruined everything." I looked at her for a long moment. Maybe for the first time, I didn't see the cold, haughty woman who once walked into my house with a judging stare. In front of me was a lost young person facing the consequences of her own choices. "Rebecca," I said, my voice lowering, "I won't judge you by your tears. I just want to ask one thing. If tomorrow Darren comes back here and asks me to let you live with us, what will you do to prove you've changed?" Rebecca looked up, eyes wet but steadier. "I won't say a word. I'll act. I'll put everything back the way I messed it up. I'll return Mr. Calvin's photo to its place. I'll take care of you if you'll allow me. And if someday you feel I'm not worthy, I'll leave no arguing, no blaming." I nodded slightly. "I don't need you to serve me. I need you to understand that this house exists on respect, not power. If you step in here again, you'll live by that principle, or you won't live here at all." Rebecca bowed her head, her voice hoarse. "I understand." We sat quietly for a long time. A breeze carried the scent of roses in from the porch, light and soothing. I looked at her thin, shaking hands on her knees and suddenly remembered myself at 22 hands, shaking the same way the first time I stepped into a new house, afraid I wasn't enough, afraid of being left behind. I spoke softly. You don't need my forgiveness. Learn to forgive yourself first. As for me, I'll wait to see what you do, not what you say. Rebecca nodded, tears falling onto the back of Lotting in them. Her hand. Thank you for still giving me a chance. I didn't answer. When she stood, I said only one thing. This is the last chance. And it's your chance to prove something to yourself, not to me. The door closed behind Rebecca, leaving the scent of Earl Grey mingled with the chrysanthemums she brought. I looked out to the garden and saw the late sun fade, leaving a pale gray sky not dark but not yet bright. I knew the real confrontation wasn't over, but at least for the first time, Rebecca didn't lie, and that small as it was enough for me to feel the tide had begun to turn. That morning, the breeze was light and the sky so clear it felt like spring was trying to arrive early. I got up early, opened the window, and let sunlight pour into a house that had been too long without human warmth. Today, I knew there would be an important meeting not to end things, but to start over, if that was truly possible. Close to 10 o'clock, there was a knock. I stepped out, and there was Rebecca. No heavy makeup, no red lipstick, no expensive perfume. Her hair was tied back, her face was pale but strangely calm. In her hands was a bouquet of red roses, bright and fresh, like they were trying to hold on to one last bit of faith. "Mrs. Wynne," she said softly, her voice shaking. I stayed quiet, watching her. She hesitated for a few seconds, then suddenly knelt right there at the threshold, holding the bouquet up in both hands. "I came to apologize, not to be forgiven, but to show I understand. I know I hurt you, and Darren too." The wind moved across the porch, stirring the petals. I could see her shoulders trembling, tears running down, but she didn't drop her head to hide anymore. I stepped forward, put my hand on her shoulder and said gently, "Stand up, Rebecca. Begging doesn't earn anyone respect, only change does." She stood, eyes red but clearer than before. I took the bouquet from her and set it on the living room table. "Thank you," I said. "But remember, there's only one chance." Rebecca nodded and whispered, "I know. I won't repeat my mistakes." That afternoon, as the light dwindled, I heard a car stop at the gate. Through the window, I saw Darren step out, so worn down I needed a second to recognize him. Patchy stubble, a wrinkled shirt, a slow, heavy gait. Beside him was Rebecca walking behind him, leaving a little space, no longer clutching her husband's arm like a challenge. I opened the door. Darren lowered his head, voice rough. "Mom, I came to apologize, and to hear whatever you want to say." I motioned for them to come in. The air in the living room felt dense. This was the same room where I'd been insulted, pushed out of my own place. Today it was the same room, but I sat in the center chair, facing them. On the table, I placed a blank sheet of paper and a pen. "Before either of you say anything," I began, "I want to set 5 rules. Not to control you, but to make sure that if we live under one roof, no one gets hurt again." Both were silent. I took a steady breath and laid out each rule, slow and firm. First, respect the homeowner. I don't need you to agree with everything I say, but in this house, words must be spoken with respect. No one gets to use a snide tone or bark orders, not even me. Second, don't change anything in the house without asking first. From a photo on the wall to a rose in the garden, everything carries memories. If you want to rearrange, we discuss it. Don't treat this place like a playground for your ego. Third, no yelling, no insults, not even once. If there's a problem, we talk. If we can't talk, we stay quiet until we calm down. One shout can shut a heart for good. Fourth, don't use Darren as a shield. I've seen how Rebecca uses my son as cover for every mistake. From now on, whoever does it owns it. Real love doesn't need a third person standing in the middle. Fifth, everyone contributes to this home with hands, not words. No one is here just to be served. We cook together, clean together, tend the garden together. If someone thinks that's beneath them, they don't deserve to live here. I looked up at the two of them. The room was still with only the clock ticking. Darren spoke first. "Mom, I agree. I'm sorry for everything. I was blind. I let someone make me forget who you are, but now I remember. I won't make excuses." His voice was low, tired, but genuine. My eyes stung, but I kept steady. Rebecca bowed her head and spoke slowly. "I agree too. I apologized to you the other day, but today I want to say it again in front of my husband. I know I broke trust, but I want to rebuild it, no matter how long it takes." I looked at them for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine, but remember, words are just the start. I need actions." That evening, for the first time in months, my kitchen lights glowed. Darren rolled up his sleeves and washed vegetables. Rebecca boiled potatoes while I made Calvin's favorite chicken stew. Steam rose, and a warm smell filled the kitchen, blending with the tap of knives, the simmering pot, and a few soft laughs. No one talked much, but the air wasn't tense. When Darren spilled a little water, Rebecca didn't snap, she smiled. Watching that, I felt my heart soften like thick ice slowly melting under the first weak sunlight of spring. When the dishes were on the table, I sat down and looked at them both. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," I said, "but tonight we're eating together like a family. No past, no mistakes, just this meal." Darren lifted his glass of water and looked at me. "Thank you for not locking the door forever, Mom," Rebecca added softly. "And thank you for believing I can be different." I smiled. "It's not that I believe, it's that I'm giving you the chance to prove it. Trust has to be replanted little by little." We ate together. The stew tasted the same sweet broth, a touch of pepper, but tonight it had something extra, the flavor of forgiveness, of a family learning to breathe again after a storm. Outside, the streetlights came on. Warm yellow spilled through the window and lit the faces of 3 people around a table, not perfect, but real. I looked at them, then around the house that once rang with arguments, and felt something small but precious: peace. After we cleared the table, Darren asked, "Mom, can I help you work on the rose garden tomorrow?" I nodded with a smile. "Sure, but wear gloves. Those pots have thorns." Rebecca stood nearby and said quietly, "If it's okay, I'd like to help too. I want to learn to care for them the way you do." I turned to her, no longer with bitterness in my eyes. "Okay. But remember, flowers only bloom when they're tended with a true heart." She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. Darren took her hand, gratitude in his eyes. I looked out at the porch, soft yellow light spreading over the old brick. This house had weathered so many months of tears and sharp words, but now there was only that gentle glow. I whispered, as if speaking to Calvin, "Look, the house is bright again. Not perfect, but it's still home." And in that moment, I knew. The storm had truly passed. Time moved faster than I expected. 6 months after that first dinner we shared post-storm, the house had its old rhythm back, different, deeper, steadier, and more peaceful. I remember clearly the first morning after our new pact. Rebecca woke early and came into the kitchen while I was about to make tea. She tapped lightly on the doorframe and asked in a small, sincere voice, "Mom, I want to change the curtains in the dining room. I'm asking first, would you be okay with that?" Such a simple question, but to me it felt like the first bell of real change. I looked at her and nodded. "Yes, but keep the old curtains. They're part of my and Calvin's memories." She smiled, didn't argue, just said softly, "I understand." From then on, Rebecca kept her word bit by bit. No more orders, No more touching things without asking. In the mornings, she swept the porch and wiped the table. In the afternoons, she helped me cook, washed dishes, and tidied the kitchen. At first, she moved awkwardly, but I didn't criticize. I let her learn, and she truly tried. Once, when I reminded her she'd put the dishes in the wrong place, Rebecca just smiled without arguing. I'm still learning. Keep telling me. I won't take it the wrong way. I looked at her and heard no trace of the old sharpness of someone who wanted to win with words. Maybe she had learned that respect doesn't make you smaller, it lets you stand steadier. Darren changed too. He didn't avoid things anymore. In the mornings before work, he'd stop by the kitchen and ask if I needed help. I'd just smile and hand him a lunchbox. Just do your job well. I saw something in his eyes. I thought I'd lost. Calm and confidence. He wasn't a man stuck between two women anymore. He was someone who could keep the peace without losing himself. One evening, sitting in the living room, Darren said quietly, "Mom, I got a promotion. They said I'm steadier and more responsible now." I smiled, hiding how proud I was. "That's good, Darren. Maybe you've learned the most important thing. Take responsibility for yourself before you try to take responsibility for others." Rebecca sat beside him, her eyes soft on her husband. "You deserve it," she said. I looked at them and felt light. Maybe I was right not to keep the door locked forever. The house returned to itself, but not itself in the old sense. It wasn't a place of shouting or stomping footsteps anymore. It was the small sounds of life: running water, a knife on a cutting board, a quiet laugh at the morning radio. Mrs. Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, dropped by one late afternoon, looked around, and said, "Mrs. Loretta, your house is lively again." The other day I walked by and heard laughter all the way to the porch. I smiled. Maybe the wind carried it. "No," she said, "that laugh is unmistakable. This house really has come back to life. Our former housekeeper, Mrs. Nancy, said something I won't forget. Before, every time I wiped down the kitchen, all I heard was sighs. Now it's different. I hear dishes clinking, folks talking, and laughter. The house has laughter again, Mrs. Loretta." I just nodded without saying anything, but inside me something like a long-buried spring rose up, not tears, but a renewed faith in restoration. One evening, when Darren got home late, Rebecca sat with me in the living room. No more awkward silences. She suddenly said, "You know, when I was little, my mother taught me one thing. Don't trust anyone. Anyone can betray you." I grew up in that fear. I didn't trust friends, didn't trust men, and I thought, if I didn't control people, they'd leave me. She paused, her voice tightening. "I know that made me into the kind of person you once hated, but now I understand. No one stays because of fear. Only love makes people stay." I stayed quiet, listening. In the warm light, Rebecca's face looked calm, with no trace of the prideful, cutting woman she used to be. I said softly, "Rebecca, everyone is afraid of being abandoned. But pushing others down so you can stand taller isn't strength. It's weakness wearing a proud mask. You have to learn to keep your self-respect without stepping on anyone else." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm learning, Mom, day by day." I smiled and set my hand on hers. "No one learns that in a day, but you're headed the right way." From that day, I noticed Rebecca truly changed. She often asked me about small things: how to make chicken soup taste sweet, how to prune roses without breaking the stems, how to brew tea just right. At first, I thought she just wanted to win me over, but gradually I realized she genuinely wanted to learn. One early morning while I was watering the plants, Rebecca came out holding a cup of tea and said quietly, "I made this. Not sure if it tastes right to you." I took a sip. "A bit strong, but not bad." I nodded. "Pretty good. A few too many leaves, but the aroma is right." She smiled. eyes lighting up like a child being praised. On spring evenings, before the heat settled in, we often sat on the porch. Darren talked about work, Rebecca chatted about the plants she was growing, and I listened with a smile. Once, Darren squeezed his wife's hand and said, "I never thought we'd be this peaceful again." I answered gently, "Peace isn't luck, Darren. It comes from each person learning to see others with the heart instead of the ego." Rebecca rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "And I think I learned that from you, Mom." I didn't reply. I just looked out at the garden. The roses were blooming evenly, their scent threading through the leaves, light as breath. Calvin used to say, "When a house has laughter and the smell of flowers, it means things are back where they belong." I smiled softly and murmured to myself, "Finally, everything is back in its place." Sometimes, standing in front of the mirror, I saw a woman with gray hair but bright eyes and a steady heart. I was no longer the weak mother pushed out of her own kitchen. I was the keeper of the fire in this home, and this time it burned with understanding, not victory. In the last 6 months, I relearned how to be a mother. Rebecca relearned how to be a daughter-in-law, Darren relearned how to be a husband and a son, and the 3 of us relearned how to be a family. Peace doesn't come from deciding who's right and who's wrong. It comes when people sit down and listen with their hearts. I stood by the window, watched the sunlight spill across the roses, and felt something rise in me that words couldn't capture. True peace had returned. That summer arrived gently. The sunlight wasn't harsh. It stretched across the porch like a warm blanket, soft and easy. I stood in the garden with pruning shears in hand, the scent of roses floating everywhere. The pots that once wilted in a dark corner now bloomed, bright and proud like me, after so many stormy months. Rebecca was hanging laundry in the backyard, hair tied back, face sun-kissed. She looked up, caught my eye, and smiled. It wasn't stiff anymore. No hidden edges, just the honest smile of someone who knows she's where she belongs. I nodded back. Darren came out of the kitchen door with a glass of lemonade and set it in my hand. "Mom, it's hot, drink this. Rebecca and I just finished planning the porch repair. I'll call the contractor next week." I smiled. "Okay, but remember to ask before you change anything." He laughed, warm. "Of course, Mom." The 3 of us sat on the porch together. The breeze moved through the trees, cicadas droned, and sunlight flickered through the leaves, reflecting on faces a little worn but peaceful. I watched Darren wipe his wife's brow and Rebecca rest her hand on his shoulder, and it struck me what I'd been waiting for wasn't perfection, but this simple moment. That night, I wrote in my journal. The fresh page trembled a bit under my pen, but the lines were steady. "Today, the house truly came back to life," I wrote. No more arguments, no more contemptuous glances, just laughter, the clink of dishes, and the smell of food filling the kitchen. I set down the pen and looked around the room. Our wedding photo, mine and Calvin's, had been rehung by Rebecca in its old place, right in the center of the living room. The warm light fell on his face, and it felt like he was looking at me, smiling. I said softly, "Finally, I kept this home not just with keys, but with love." Time passed, and we fell into a habit of sitting together every evening. Sometimes it was late tea, sometimes just a few bits of small talk. I told Rebecca old stories about Calvin, how he worked construction, always came home late, but never forgot to bring me a peppermint candy. She listened closely, eyes damp, then said, "I wish I'd known him. Maybe I would have learned how to love sooner." I smiled. "It's never too late, Rebecca. What matters is you started." She squeezed my hand, the hand that had once been hard and cold like metal, now softer, warmer. In that touch, I saw a woman changing day by day. And I understood forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. Another evening, as dusk fell, Darren brought out 2 wooden chairs and set them on the porch. "Mom, come sit with me." "The sunset's beautiful." I sat beside him. The sun was sinking slow behind the distant hills, washing the sky in bright orange. From the kitchen came the sound of a pan sizzling as Rebecca cooked. It reminded me of years long gone when Calvin and I sat just like this, watching the evening fade without a word. "You know, Darren," I said softly, "I once thought I'd never feel this kind of peace again. But it turns out peace doesn't come from circumstances. It comes when people learn to stop hurting each other." Darren nodded, silent, eyes far away. "Mom," he said gently, "I know there will never be enough words to make up for what I did. But I promise, for the rest of my life, I'll live in a way that makes you proud." I set my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. "You don't have to make me proud, Darren. Just live decently, that's enough." That night, as I got into bed, the breeze carried the scent of roses through the window. I thought about the months behind us, from shouting and tears to silence and forgiveness. It was like a piece of music with every low and high note now settling into a complete ending. I smiled and whispered to myself, I didn't lose. I just had to relearn how to love properly. The next morning, Rebecca brewed tea for me while Darren trimmed the roses. I sat on the porch and watched those two people, once the source of my pain, now symbols of renewal. I added one last line to my journal. This house was once taken, then won back, not by anger but by grace. And that's what made it stronger than ever. I closed the journal and shut my eyes, listening to the wind slip across the roof. I knew Calvin, somewhere, was smiling too. Morning light sparkled through the leaves onto the tea table, where the three of us, Saturday. Rebecca shared plans to open a small flower shop in town. Darren talked about his new role at work, and I simply listened, warmth spreading through my chest. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. We've learned how to be a family. Not perfect, not loud, just real. Like the tea's aroma, the sunlight, and the laughter threading through the house, I turn to the audience listening to this story, those who may have been hurt, betrayed, or lost faith. I want to say, sometimes, to keep your peace, you have to let an old part of yourself go. Forgive not because others deserve it, but because you deserve the relief. If you've been through something like I have, I hope you know any door can be opened again, as long as you dare to hold the key. And before I close this story, I want to thank all of you who listened. Thank you for giving your time to a woman like me, to this small journey of courage and love. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment and share. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next ones. I promise we'll meet again on golden afternoons where those once hurt find themselves in the gentle light of grace.